Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Abel Contemporary Gallery. My name is Teresa Abel, and I am really pleased to be here today with Charles Munch. We are here to talk about his work in general and specifically pieces in his show, Miracles and Mysteries. Charles has been actively painting and exhibiting since moving to Wisconsin in 1971. He has had more than 25 one-person exhibitions at galleries and museums, including the Milwaukee Art Museum, the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art, and the Chicago Cultural Center. Munch lives and works in the Driftless region of southern Wisconsin, and we are so pleased to have him here today. Thanks. So Charles and I have been emailing about the direction that this conversation should go in about his work. And Charles really wants to start talking about narrative in his work and art in general, I think.
Yeah, and I think Teresa wanted to talk about it too.
I did, yes.
It was actually her idea, but I thought it was a great idea. And the more I thought about it, I thought it could lead into a lot of interesting subjects and topics.
Excuse me, and we will open it up at the end of this conversation for questions, and you can ask about anything.
The thing about narrative in painting is that I sometimes think it should be called non-narrative, or the difficulty of narrative in painting. It really is something that you have to make a huge effort over, because take photographs. If you have a photograph and you think about where does that photograph come from, it's kind of like a detail picked out of the whole world, just one small piece of the world. And in theory, and probably for the photographer, the world continues on all sides around that photograph. And the photographer gets to choose how to crop it, how to select, and all that. But with paintings, even though paintings and photographs are often called pictures together, as if it's all one kind of thing, paintings are entirely different. They end at the boundary, at least the kind of paintings that I and most people have done for a long time. They end at the boundary, and you don't have any idea what's going on even an inch outside that boundary. It's Neverland. There's nothing there until the artist chooses to meditate or wonder what might be there, and chooses to maybe make it larger or extend it in some direction or another. It's such an interesting thing for an artist to be able to do that.
I think about when you're discussing that, and you said I've been doing this for a long time, as have other artists. I don't want to take this in too much of a different direction, but that is so true. And your work is so, I think a lot of people think of it as very contemporary and of its time, which it is. But I think it so directly correlates from your predecessors historically, and it's so rooted in narrative and painting forever. And that idea that you're talking about really has been true for all time.
Yeah, that's partly what I was pausing to try to remember. I'm a huge fan of old master paintings. About half the paintings that I like the most are Renaissance paintings, especially Italian Renaissance. And so I've been looking at those paintings most of my life, and wondering about the narratives in them. And so many of them are story paintings, narrative paintings. And it's really hard for a beginner looking at those paintings to know what the narrative is. A lot of them are biblical, a lot of them are mythological, but when you see the painting, all you see is this frozen image. People are doing whatever they're doing, but they're frozen in that position, and it's a big mystery for someone like me when I was young. Before I knew as much as I do about the Bible now. I mean, I was raised in a Christian atmosphere, but I didn't really know the Bible. And even now, a lot of what I know about the Bible is just what I've learned from looking at paintings. And it's the same with mythology. I know quite a bit about Greek and Roman mythology, but it's from looking at paintings. And one of the examples that I had thought of before I came in today was there are pictures that you often see of a woman and a man kind of in a bedroom. There's a bed there, and the man is, maybe he's naked, I'm not sure, but they're kind of struggling, and the man seems to be trying to pull away maybe, and the woman seems to be trying to pull him back, and you can't really tell what's going on there, who's pulling in which direction. It's obviously some kind of drama, but until even the title, it's Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And this is the Joseph of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, or whatever he's called, the coat of many colors. And early in his career in Egypt, I think it was, Potiphar, who was an official, his wife took a liking to Joseph, and she wanted to seduce him, and he didn't want to cooperate. And so that's what the story is in this picture. He's trying to flee, and she's trying to hold on to him. But you can't tell that from the painting. You can't tell what's going on unless you do a little research in the Bible, or however you go about it. And that's an example of the difficulty of narrative painting, which it's been going on forever, except that in the past there were a lot of conventions of narrative painting that allowed people to kind of codify different gestures, so you could sort of tell what was going on, at least better than you could if you were a naive person like me. Another one that always interested me was it's a scene, many of you will probably know this, with a woman seems to be riding on a bull, and the bull is probably walking off into the water, maybe. And you see the same scene, just as Joseph and Potiphar's wife. The scene is repeated over and over by different artists. And you see this scene with the woman and the bull. And it interests me. It's always interested me, because I've been interested in the relationship between people and animals for a long time. But it was hard to know what was going on until you learn the title, which is Europa and the Bull. And then if you study up on it, you find that the bull isn't just any bull, it's Zeus, disguised as a bull. And he's abducting Europa. She seems to be pretty cooperative, but
in the paintings.
Yeah, in the painting. Yeah, but it's the abduction of Europa, and I think, he has his way, and I think she even has a child or children by him. But it's the scene of a woman and a bull, and in a landscape. I mean, who can resist that? But there's, you know, there's a mystery there,
Yeah.
especially for somebody who hasn't yet studied this kind of thing. And then over the years, I've learned more and more about all of these stories, all these Bible stories, these stories from mythology. But they don't come right away, and they don't always come easily. You know, you have to figure things out. And in a way that this is kind of connected to my own work, back in the 80s, I think, I was very conscious of the fact that there were all these biblical and mythological paintings that if you didn't know anything about them, if you wiped your mind clean, you know, of the knowledge of what was going on, you could make them into some entirely different drama. You know, things could be going backwards, or everything could happen in a slightly different way, because you really can't tell. This is the problem with narrative painting.
Right. Is it a problem?
It is a problem. It's a puzzle. It's a mystery. It's something.
But doesn't the mystery make it good in some way?
I don't know. We don't have to say.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have to quantify.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I was going to lead up to, though, is that in the 80s, I took a number of, I think they were mainly biblical, but I'm not sure, of these iconographies, these scenes that were easily misinterpreted. At least they were by me, if I wiped my mind clean. And I made my own version of it, and I put my own title to it, and I completely reinterpreted this drama in my own terms. Like I did one that was, it was based on one of the many scenes of a executioner, somebody chopping someone's head off and then holding the head there. I mean, there's various times when that happens in the Bible, especially. Scenes of martyrdom. And I called it poet and artist, or poet and painter. And I think I put my own features slightly on the severed head. Yeah. And so I guess I identified with the artist, and I felt like I maybe was kind of a victim at the moment in some sense, like it was hard to be an artist, you know. In any case, that was an example. And there are all these scenes of the baptism of Christ. And Jesus is in the water. Sometimes it's deep water, sometimes it isn't. But in any case, John the Baptist is there, you know, pouring water on his head or doing something. He's often touching him in some way. And my version had a man standing there and touching the head of the person in the water. And so it was these two men, and I think I had the person, the so-called John the Baptist figure, as a black man. Anyway, and I had him holding on to the head or the hair, maybe, I can't remember quite, of the figure who's in the water. And the water was rushing, and I titled it Saved from Drowning. And I can't quite remember exactly how this, you know, was one of my, how this connected with my own emotions. But I'm sure it did at the time. And it also kind of took the earlier paintings as I co-opted them in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I used them, but I also absorbed them, and I didn't deny them.
Right. But and it seems like you were intentionally trying to flip a completely different narrative on them.
I did. I wanted to.
Yeah. And then, so in your work now, when you're approaching narrative, is it important for you that the viewer understand what you have in mind to some degree?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
You know, I'm always
But talk about
happier.
it,
I'm
yeah.
always happier when they do.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly willing to let people have their own interpretations, and I try not to feel too disappointed, you know,
Yeah.
because sometimes I do have a kind of an attachment to what's going on in the picture. But this is, again, this connects up to one of the big topics that are connected in a way to narration, but the whole idea of representation and abstraction. This is what my whole career of the last 40 years is about. Before that, I was a realist painter, you know, a very detailed, serious realist painter. And then at some point, I felt like I had to make a flip into something entirely different, which was somewhat this style. This is when it started. And I just kind of went cold turkey. It wasn't a gradual transition. I just kind of flipped. And as part of that, I felt like I couldn't even look at the world around me too much, or else I would be seduced into it again. So at first I was doing everything out of my head. Even though I was doing landscape, it was imaginary landscape, imaginary dramas, imaginary everything. And so that was part of the way that I got into this way of doing things. But from the very beginning, and ever since then, I've had to deal with the question of abstraction versus representation. And the question of semi-abstraction is basically what it is. It's always been semi-abstraction. And how do I define that? I mean, there's a whole lot of room in there between abstraction and representation. You can kind of wander back and forth in there, and that's what I've been doing ever since. And the narration question is kind of on the representation side. The more abstract I get, the more difficult it is to control a narrative or feel like, I mean, it's not that they don't kind of exist anyway. And where I am now is in these paintings, as far as I'm concerned, it's fairly far in the direction of representation. There's been times when I have been distinctly more abstract than this, but it's constantly on my mind. I mean, not constantly, but you know, as a painter, and like there's other painters here too. You all know that you're doing all the technical stuff and the process and trying to make a painting work, but there's some part of you that's still dreaming about where am I in this big expanse of possibilities. And for me, that's often about representation and abstraction. Where do I want to be? It's not a clear-cut thing at all. In this show, you know, there are times when there's different ways in which you can be semi-abstract, different ways. Like the painting right there that yeah, it's called Rocky Shore. Um, it's pretty representational, but it happens to have a very abstract structure. And for me, that's one of the ways in which I bring abstraction into my work at this moment. You know, it's not always the kind of abstraction that makes it so that you can't quite tell what's going on. I mean, here, I don't think anyone would doubt what was happening in that picture, but it does have a kind of a rigid, what would you call it? A rigid structure,
Yeah.
kind of a linear outline that allows this feeling for abstraction to come through. And the thing that's important to me about abstraction, and that always keeps pulling me back in that direction, is that pure abstraction, not just mine, I mean, everybody's that I like, is it has so much power in it. It makes space all by itself. It creates emotion. It creates activity, makes things move, if you know what I mean. And all that power that is so wonderful in pure abstraction is something that I want to have in my paintings. And the farther I go away from pure abstraction, the more I lose that. And so I feel as if if I'm somewhere in the middle, then these forces that create space and create, I mean, even that's what makes weather in a painting, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Well,
we had talked a little bit about weather and atmosphere in some of the paintings, like this painting right here.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of elements of abstraction in the composition of it and the design, but then there's all this atmosphere and perspective, and you know what sort of a day that is, and I don't know. I think when you get right on the border of that, it's so successful and kind of exciting.
Yeah, I mean, the same things that are happening in this painting in that way are happening in most of the paintings. Yeah. I mean, they mostly, I guess I maybe should say something about landscape, because that's the heart of me, is landscape. I mean, I love it. I'm immersed by it whenever I'm in it. I live in a place that I see a lot of landscape. And the landscapes, there's only a couple of pure landscapes here, but the landscapes, they're very close to abstraction in my feelings. You know, you can almost just throw together a bunch of abstract forms and they turn into a landscape so easily. I mean, they're already moving, they're already almost creating weather, and then you just have to kind of pin them down a little bit and you've got a landscape. And that one over there with the plowed fields is an example of that. And the one I was just talking about here is sort of an example of it. But so the landscapes are at the back of all these other paintings. And often the landscape is what kind of starts the thing going. I lost track of myself for a minute.
That's all right.
What were you asking about?
Well, we were talking about.
I don't want to.
Yeah, please.
Here in this painting, I just wanted to bring it in a little bit. There's the landscape, which is about as abstract or not abstract as most of the landscapes. Yeah. But I wanted to point out that in the foreground is a piece taken out of the story of Orpheus. And the title is Orpheus at Dusk. And it's a little irrelevant, but this is where the inspiration came from. It came from I guess it's a Greek myth of Orpheus. Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus has a long story and it doesn't end happily, but in this place, in this moment, it's a very happy thing. He is such a good musician. I mean, that's partly how he got in trouble, was that he was just such a good musician that the gods were jealous. Anyway, and he was so good that when he played, the animals gathered to listen. And so this is what I'm showing here. But I kind of chose the dusk, that moment, because things are going to turn down for him. He doesn't end up well, but at this moment, it's a beautiful moment for Orpheus.
And this painting in particular, we talked a little bit about when you were installing the show about the landscapes with like this one, which is deer versus wolf.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely narrative, and then there's some of the pieces like mammals dancing. I think that's what it's called, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you don't actually have such a specific narrative, right?
I guess not. I mean, I don't even know if this is that specific.
Oh, okay. But I feel like this one resides somewhere between those places, because the figures in the front, I guess what I'm leading to is symbols in your work, because I think it's interesting that sometimes the animals are so very much animals, they're running on all fours, and sometimes bears can stand on, but it seems like sometimes the animals are personifying or becoming more like humans when they're standing up.
Yeah.
But I'm just guessing, and you're going to tell me.
I guess one thing about this is an example of, this is one of those frozen images, which we kind of assume that there's danger, the deer is running and the wolf is pursuing, but you can't really tell. This is something we bring to it. And I mean, I assume they're not playing, but they could be, right? And it's something that I find endlessly fascinating. I mean, this picture, which I was fascinated enough by to make 3 versions of. I mean, there's at least one over there. I don't know where the other one is, but I made 3 versions of it, and each one is changed significantly. And this one is changed quite a lot. I brought more drama into it, but it still doesn't make it so that, I changed the weather a little bit maybe, but it still doesn't make it so that I know for sure what's going on there. And so I'm always a little bit, I don't know if there's any of them where the narrative is really pinned down. But on the other hand, if we talk about narration, another duality or something to pair with it is poetry, or sort of something more abstract in the way of, I'm not sure how to say it. But in any case, there are examples like this, the Bless the Child. For me, it's all about poetry. There's no real narrative there for me, even though I could make up one if I wanted to.
Right.
But and you said the word symbols, and so that brings that in too. It's a painting and significantly, there's no landscape, although there's some landscape elements, but I brought together various things. It's more of a still life,
Yeah.
And I've done still lifes through my whole career, and this is one of those, and I brought together various elements and juxtaposed them in a way that's meaningful to me, but in a way that I don't entirely understand myself. But I was interested enough in it long enough to, to make a pretty big painting about it.
It's beautiful. It's actually one of my favorites in the show. And I think now that we're having this conversation, what's interesting is because the background is black, it reiterates there is no weather and there's no atmosphere. And I was just picturing you could have painted that with in one of your landscapes, and it would be an entirely different painting.
Yeah. The other painting or group of paintings that's similar in a way to my mind is the polyptych that's on the other side of this, a group of 4 panels, and there are these standing figures, and in a way, again, these are figures, but I've treated them a little bit like still lifes or like statues, and they don't have a lot of character. They're motionless. They're kind of idealized in a certain way, and
if I remember, they're looking right at the viewers.
Yeah, they're looking right at the viewer, but what they have in common with this, besides this feeling of still life, is that they're intended for some kind of contemplation that's different from the others. You're supposed to slow down when you look at them, or I want you to slow down when you look at them and think about them in a different way than many of the others. I mean, I want people to look at all the paintings slowly, but these are different in that way.
Well, the others have a lot of, it forces the viewer's eye with motion because the animals are running or moving in some way, or they're interacting, so they inherently become more active, where everything's more static, so you do think of it as
There's a still life on the end there, which, as I said, I've done a lot of still lifes, and in that one, I was inspired to paint the potted flower because I knew that I wanted to have something happening outside the window. And this is an example of one of the ways in which I try to bring people and animals together. This is an interior of a house, and a flower, and yet on the outside, something else is happening. There's something entirely different happening, and we don't know quite what it is. There's another small mystery there. Teresa, did you have some more things to prompt me about?
Well, I could talk to you all day with
Okay,
questions, but I guess I just want to, in the landscapes, let's talk about if there's the same things that repeat themselves over, whether it's a particular animal. Do you create your own set of symbols where you would say, when this shows up in a Munch painting, it always means this? Or not?
I don't really. I mean, I don't think much about symbols in my paintings. I used to in the distant past, until I paint something like that.
Yeah.
And then I put these items in, and I treat them like symbols, and I try and puzzle them out.
Yeah.
They seem enigmatic to me, and I know that there's something symbolic working there. I'm trying to look around and see what else is symbolic, but I don't really see it.
No, that answers the question.
There are things that always interest me, like the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water.
Yeah.
Those have always interested me as things that are compelling, and that I often want to have, 3 or 4 of them in a painting at once, because it just makes it rich. It keeps me interested, and I think you'll find that those are things that are in a lot of the paintings.
Yeah.
And I think you asked once about fire,
Right.
and it's not always something destructive. Sometimes it's purifying, and in this case, it certainly isn't a destructive element for me.
It's elemental.
It's paired with a dish of water, and I don't know where to go.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I guess so. Before I let everyone else ask you questions, the one thing that I'm still sort of compelled by is in some of your work, it seems like there's something mysterious about to happen or something ominous about to happen. Not always, and I'm wondering if you. I mean, sometimes you must be aware that if you have a building on fire, it's obviously, but do you think about that when you're composing? The piece is, how much control do you have over the narrative, or is it after the fact that you think, oh, this seems like this could seem a little bit ominous or mysterious, or some of them just seem like kissable kingdom, and
I think you're right, and I think I'm slightly attracted to that.
Yeah.
I like having the painting be a little bit not uncertain. I don't want it to be obvious, and that's partly just for my own purposes. I don't want to get bored with it, and I suppose it's going to be good for other people who live with these paintings, that they maybe won't get bored with it so soon.
Yeah.
But for me personally, I like that in a painting.
Yeah.
You said something else that no. Huh.
If I did, I feel like that completed the answer.
Yeah. Okay.
So anything else that you want to
I think we could
add, or let's bring people in?
People will remind me of things.
Yeah.
Please ask questions. I love answering questions. You
choose, getting back to the word mystery or mysteriousness, to sustain the mystery in your paintings?
Can you talk a little louder?
To sustain the mystery in the paintings, would it be better not to have titles?
That's a good question. I put titles on them usually just because I want to have something to hang on to, a handle for the painting. Sometimes I put titles because I want to avoid having the viewer interpret it wrong. My semi-abstraction is open to misinterpretation. I know that, and I sometimes try to avoid it by putting a title on that, it points the finger at something. And other times, the title just, it comes to me, like this one called January Thaw. I'm not sure why I called it that.
That's the one
it seems there's some poetry in that for me. And so it works, but I don't know where it came from. I didn't think of that from the beginning, that's for sure.
For people watching this video after the fact, January Thaw is a painting of a house on fire in winter.
Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Charles, could you talk a little bit about your career as a paintings conservator? How that influenced your work and you physically have a very important 17th century Dutch paintings.
Yeah. Jane Furchgott and I worked as painting conservators for, I guess, 40 years. I'm not sure how long, but in any case, we each worked half time repairing and restoring old paintings and for museums and galleries and private collectors. And the main thing that I can say about it, I mean, it taught me a few things technically, but the main thing that it did for me was spending all that time in front of paintings by other people, looking at them intently. I learned something about what the essence of a painting is. You know, this is what it takes to have a painting work or to be a good painting. Or I just felt like I absorbed from all these hundreds of paintings that I lived with very intimately for all those years. It just affected me a lot that way. And I'm sure that I took that deep feeling about paintings to my own paintings and tried to make them live up to that. You know what I mean? I wanted them to not fail or look weak, or you know what I'm saying? And I think that it meant a lot to me. I mean, I learned about some art history. I learned all the things that you learn in other ways. But I think that was a big part of what I took out of all those years of working with paintings, working with other people's paintings.
I think it takes some courage to actually do what you and Jane did with the physical changes that you have.
Well, I'd rather not talk about that
Oh.
courage right now.
But
yes,
you're more
it's
bravery
true.
about being an artist too, not to be intimidated by your own process, because you.
I think you're right that my own process, I had a long time, it took me a long time to settle down into whatever you might call a process with this kind of painting. It was always, seemed kind of out of control, and I never knew what was going to happen next. And at some point, and maybe I brought some of this from painting restoration, I learned that I could do whatever I wanted at any point, and I could fix it. You know what I mean? If I made a mess, I could repair it in some sense. I didn't always have to. For a long time, I was kind of like a victim of chance. I would start out and I'd be doing the painting, and at a certain point, it would just go wrong. And I didn't feel like I could do anything about it. It was just lost to me. And so I painted a lot of paintings that didn't ever come to fruition. And that was kind of upsetting to me. It was good in a way, because
did you destroy them or keep them or eventually work them?
I either destroyed them or they only existed in my sketchbook.
Okay.
The sketchbook was a big place where I either had those successes or failures at that time. In any case, that's the best I could say about that.
Could you describe the importance in seeing a show
Can
like
you
this,
talk
which is
a
so,
little
which is a show like this, which is so great, and seeing the amount of work. I'm really impressed by your use of outline. You know, and not only outline, but the way the outlines integrate into the framing. I own one of your silkscreen prints, which, to be honest, I love. But seeing these outside of frames, where the frame is just composed into the outline and the structure of the art, could you address that?
This means a lot to me. This question and this topic.
It's a really good question because
Yeah,
we talk about this a lot. It's so important to us.
I generate the paintings by drawing colored lines and then filling in this is in watercolor, and filling in the spaces between the lines. So this is the sketching phase of the work, watercolor in the sketchbook. And from the very beginning, it's real important to me to have that image clearly set away from the page, from the sketchbook. And so then when I start working on the oil painting, I'm working always on an unstretched canvas pinned to the wall, and the dimensions are uncertain to some extent. I don't have the stretcher at the beginning. I often order that or make that afterwards. And so there's a certain amount of flexibility, so where the painting ends, the edges are just hugely important to me, and they're always in question. And then when the painting is in process, so it's on the wall, it's being, I'm painting it on this canvas pinned to the wall. This is hard to explain, but I feel like I want to emphasize the painting as an object. This is kind of strange because it goes against the whole question of 2- and 3-dimensional art. You know, these are very 2-dimensional images. They're very flat in a way, and I like the fact that they're flat.
Yeah.
But I always want them, you know, once they're out in the world, stretched and, you know, out in the world, I always want them to feel like objects in some way. It makes me feel better to have them seem like an object, especially like when I see them from a distance. I often think, is that a large object I'm seeing? Is it a small object? Is it something that if I just took it off the wall, I could hold in my hand? There's something about the ambiguity of objects that I want to emphasize with this line. And the line around the painting, even though it's wider usually, is the same line that I'm using to delineate the objects within the painting. And so it gives this sense of unity in my own emotions and my own feelings about the painting. Can I explain this better? Would you help me?
Well, it just made me think when you said that, and I don't know if this is what you're trying to say, but in a way, say for instance, when you outline the fire, you're reiterating that the fire is an object in a way in the painting, and then by outlining the painting itself, you're reiterating that the painting in and of itself has now just become an object.
That's absolutely true. And another way of explaining it is sometimes, not always, I start out with a very small sketch, you know, a thumbnail sketch, either in color or in black and white. And sometimes as a way of getting myself going from that thumbnail sketch, I look at it and I think, what if this wasn't a thumbnail sketch, but it was an actual painting, but I was seeing it at a great distance? And that changes my feeling about the sketch, and it helps me move on to the next. Because often, if I think of it as something seen from a great distance, then I think, oh, so that's how it looks. I mean, I have a new insight into what it is that I'm seeing. And I can see it as a large painting seen at a great distance. I don't know what that.
Yeah.
Did I answer some question there? I don't know.
Thank you.
That was a good question.
I'm trying to see. One quick thing. I just feel like you can't talk about Charles Munch's work without bringing up color. So I just wanted to compliment your excellent color abilities. I don't really have a question, it's just a compliment.
Yeah, color is like the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's, in some ways, it's all I care about, along with, you know, landscape and this idea of underlying abstraction. I think it's a big part of what flipped me out of representation into this kind of work, because in the representational paintings, I just couldn't get enough color into them because it wasn't realistic to have that much color.
Persistence pays off, yes.
Something about color?
When you talk about representation and moving away from representation,
I meant realism.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
To me, I mean, it's all representational art.
I'm sorry.
But one of the things I love about your work is you have a reverence for an object that's so obvious. And I think the outlining and the bold colors and the essentialism in how you represent the objects that you present, it's clear you kind of have a love affair with your environment, and that comes through very strongly in the paintings. The luminosity,
Yeah,
your work is
color.
really fascinating.
the color of the luminosity, those are such a deep and basic concern for me that I sometimes forget that that's what it's all about. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm so fascinated by the painting. I think you said the title before.
Bless
The
the
child.
child.
Yes, thank you.
Bless the
And I had a couple of questions about that. When I look at your other paintings, I feel like I'm seeing a moment in time, and it's maybe often a profound moment. It appears to be a profound moment. This looks like a summary to me.
Oh, what?
A summary,
No?
almost like saying these objects, which there are like 5, 6, are the
7.
profound moments of
Seven.
Time. Well, in some way, it seems like it's a summary and it's a visualization of a lifetime. I wanted to know if that was anything like what was in your head as you painted it, and also I wanted to know if it was a recent work, and if you were excited by it and think, oh, I want to make more like that.
I don't know the date on it. I think it would be 2020 approximately. It's basically recent. And I don't know for sure what you mean by a summary, but it's for me, you know, it's an altarpiece. It's a still life, but it's an altarpiece. It's a collection of things that could be used for meditation or for other purposes. I'm not sure. You said something else that piqued my interest, but now I already forgot.
I forgot it too.
You were talking about it as a summary,
No.
and would you do more light?
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is actually part of a continuing series of paintings that I have done. They all have a similar structure. They all have a dark background, and they all have a shelf or a table or something in the foreground. They're all still lifes of a certain sort. And this is maybe the 4th or the 5th, but they are spread over time. And so I don't think I ever had 2 of them in the same show. I have, you know, 1 or 2 that probably were never sold, but
Yeah. And looking out at the people who are here today, I recognize so many of you, and I know a lot of you are really familiar with Charles's career and a lot of his work, but some of them, if you aren't, a lot of the things we're alluding to, we're alluding to a lot of things from the past and paintings like this. There's a great book that we have here at the counter. And then you can look at like the realism and other works that we sort of were talking about. So I just wanted that as an aside
Yeah.
because I feel like there's a lot of
Yeah,
insider
it
conversations
expands on a lot
happening.
of things that we talked about already.
Yeah. Yes.
It seems, Charles, like over time, your paintings have become more and more peaceful. And so even when there's, action and possibly something unfortunate, there's still, that piece is still imbued with stillness in a way. And just wondering if you have anything to say about that. I mean, I remember there used to be a lot more conflict and explosions.
No, I think you're right. I think I have mellowed or I'm mellowing. And the painting with fire, that's the oldest painting in the show by far. And I think when I painted that, it was during a slightly even angry period where I was trying to express a certain amount of anger at my fellow humans, even, and in the present show, the painting on the opposite side of those three with the it's called Expulsion from Hell, and that's not exactly peaceful. That's one of the two pandemic paintings in the show, and I guess I've kind of put the pandemic in the past a little bit. So I'm still feeling peaceful and, but I think you're right. There's less drama, less anger. I never was an angry person. I think maybe there's less humor even. So it's gone both ways. Maybe I've come to some kind of center point.
Seems like reverence to me.
I'm sorry?
Seems like reverence to me. Imbued with stillness.
That sounds good.
We'll go with that.
One thing I wanted to say, if it's time, about the Expulsion from Hell painting. It's based on the story from Genesis about the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, which is depicted in a lot of paintings. And, I've absorbed over the years thoroughly. And in the old paintings, it shows Adam and Eve suddenly ashamed of their nudity and being chased out of the Garden of Eden. They're very unhappy, right? And so I've reimagined that story to a certain extent. I have the two naked people and their companion, a deer, emerging out of the flames, which in the title I call hell, but in my mind was the pandemic. And so in a way it was a hopeful vision of these three entities being expelled or ejected or anyway, thrown out of the flames into some place that was perhaps better. But they're maybe traumatized, changed perhaps, but at least better. Yeah, it's a hopeful painting in my mind.
Yes.
I'm curious, you kind of touched on this earlier, I think, when you talked about when you do the thumbnails as you get started, but there's such a depth that I'm seeing to a lot of your paintings. And I think it kind of goes, I see it two different ways. Like when you talk about the still life, there's something going on in the background. But with a lot of these, there's a lot going in the foreground. But if you look at the painting, the deer versus wolf, if I believe that's what it's called correctly, there's real depth there. There's still a lot to the painting other than what's in the foreground. And I'm just curious, do you come up with the idea and start with the foreground? Do you start with the background? Like, where do you usually start? How does that process?
Well, first I want to say that I love it that you see a lot of depth. because I try to, I'm always, this is part of the struggle, you know. These are flat paintings. They have lines that kind of tie them down to the foreground and the frame. But I'm working all the time to put depth into them. And I know that in an abstract painting or semi-abstract painting like this, you know, you can only make about, what, 6 or 8 inches of depth out of these materials that I have, that I'm working with. And I work very hard to make that happen, to put, I don't know, it's not just one thing in front of another that makes the depth. There's all sorts of painterly tricks or elements or tools that I can use to make depth happen, even though it's a basically flat object. And I love that. I mean, that's one of the things that keeps me going. The challenge of doing exactly what you're talking about.
And I think because I'm not sure, there's a way, they look so exactly like they're supposed to be, and so complete, and because of the outlines and the definite shapes, they're deceptively, not simple isn't quite the word, but I think that you don't realize all of the work that goes into you making sure that every line, the shape, the form, the color is creating that depth and that atmosphere. The viewer doesn't have to get, it's actually really pleasant thing as a viewer. We don't have to, we're not thinking about your labor.
I don't want you to. No, I work very hard to cover my tracks. But and in some cases, they do come easily. In other cases, it's just a seemingly endless struggle. I don't usually abandon them after they've, you know, gotten to be a certain size painting. But I sometimes keep working on them for a long time.
Yes.
I don't know if this is a compliment or a question, but I really like the way all elements are integrated, no matter which direction you go in. It's like, I think, oh, he's got this is the way he does it. This is that. He simplifies things. The place where it gets really complicated, I know in my work, but I think in a lot of people's work, is when you do water. And when I look at this painting, I look at that painting over there, the canoe, and I look at the way you've done the splashes on the edge of the shore, and I just like, oh my goodness, that's so perfect. And I look at this cliff around the fin, and I just think, what a completely different way to do water than that, and yet it's still within your style. And the way you keep things within your style, and yet you're still able to find more and more different things you can express in more and more interesting ways.
I do have
It's
a
just
lot of,
I just admire it.
I have a lot of different marking systems, you know, and they aren't very profound. I mean, I don't feel like I'm that good at water, especially, but I do have, you know, certain kinds of marks that I use to clue it, you know, to give people a clue as to what I'm depicting without making it too descriptive. And that's an example of that. John Miller here is a master of water, and I don't feel like I am. But I'm glad that, you know, it interests you at least. I love painting water. As I said, I like painting water and air and fire and, you know, all those things.
John Miller.
I just like to talk about, I think you are a
I
master
can't
of water.
hear you.
I think you are a master of water.
Oh,
I think that just like, say, human speech, you have figured out how to speak simply to say profound things.
Well said.
But I think also, I'm interested in getting back to the thumbnail idea.
uh-huh.
Because it seems to me, at least one of the miracles and mysteries, is how the idea even gets to the thumbnail stage. And then how you know what to do with that. And so I'd be curious just to have a sense of, every one of these paintings represents a ton of decisions. And you made decisions to do this one, and this one, and this one. And they all started evidently from something. And I'm curious to know, how does that happen?
Oh my God, that's
How much time do you have?
that's really no. It's not the time.
Yeah.
It's like you want. I don't know. I just. This is where do the ideas come from? It's basically what you're asking, and they come from all directions. And when I was younger, when I was starting to work this way, I had 5 ideas a day, and they were in my sketchbook, and I just filled it up, and then I would go back later and harvest the best of them and all that. And gradually, over the years, those ideas don't come so fast anymore. And they come from all different directions, As I said, in the distant past, I was making up everything. Every landscape, just everything was invented. And now, you can probably tell, I'm inspired by the North Woods. I'm inspired by the driftless area. I'm inspired by a lot of things I see. So I'm not making things up that much as I used to. And that's partly because my imagination isn't working that way anymore. I wish it did in some ways, but there are trade-offs too. So I'm not too sorry, but it's really, it's been a long process to get to this spot. And part of it was going through those other stages. And as far as the thumbnails, I often find that when I have just a glimmer of an idea, and that's something that I try not to let those go by, because they are kind of rare. And I often just make a note, a pencil note, smaller than small, you know what I mean? And that often works very well for something to just keep growing out. Just as I grow the small paintings here into larger paintings, or the way I grow my color sketches in my sketchbook into oil paintings, it often is wonderful to have these little notations, because they are so evocative in a way that I can hardly describe. I hope that helps.
Anything else? Great.
And I'll be here for a while, and
Yeah.
if you have something you want to say,
Great.
you can say it.
Well, good. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thanks for coming out on this beautiful afternoon.
It's great. This show will be up through November 6th. We also have showing right now our 19th annual Ceramics Invitational, and upstairs in gallery number 5 is Tim O'Neill. And his installation is called Paul's Creek Lodge. And he will be here 2 weeks from today having an artist talk as well. And again, thank you, Charles. Such a good talk.